Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back again to Live with Lindsay. So we're a little bit earlier today because today we're going to be speaking with Madeleine Black, who is in Scotland. And so 6 p.m. my time, Eastern, was a little bit late for her. And so we're going to be joined by Madeleine in just a moment. Madeleine calls herself a courage cultivator, and for good reason. So I'm just going to share her bio with you. If you're here watching, though, I'd love for you to just let us know that you're here with us. Let us know where you're watching from, as usual. So after decades of silence, Madeleine decided to share her story publicly online in September 2014. And she completely underestimated what the response would be. She's passionate about speaking out to end the shame, stigma, and silence surrounding sexual violence and to help others to find their voice too. And so today we're going to be talking about Madeleine's own experience through her experience of sexual violence and learning to find her voice and share her story. And we're also going to extrapolate to how do we do this in our own lives, whether you have experienced sexual violence or not. I think this is pertinent to all sorts of different experiences that people have, because it can be hard to speak up and share what we're really thinking and feeling. And so we will be extrapolating to the workplace also, and how to have those hard conversations, whether it be about, really intense traumatic experiences or just more everyday experiences that you're having. And so welcome again to everyone watching, and I'll just have Madeleine join us here.
Hi,
so
Lindsay.
Hi.
Hello, Lindsay. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for making it earlier, because otherwise I think it would have been like midnight for me or something.
Yeah, that's a little bit wild to try to stay awake and on topic at that time of night. So yeah, I'm really happy that you could join us here though today. So I guess let's maybe just start off, if you're comfortable, just sharing a little bit about, your life history and what's brought you to doing the work that you're doing with us today.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned at the start, I am a survivor of sexual violence. So I was gang raped when I was 13, and then I was raped 3 more times before the age of 18. I kept quiet for many, many years, really due to my shame, fear, guilt. But as you mentioned, 2014, I decided to share my story publicly. I was just tired of being ashamed, for this crime that was committed against my body. And so I went public. I shared my story with the Forgiveness Project, because there's an element of forgiveness in my story. And yeah, as you mentioned, it just took off. Sadly, it's because I know my story is not uncommon, and I also know it's not that common for people to be so vocal about sexual violence in the way that I am. There are more and more of us speaking out now, especially with the phenomena #MeToo. But a lot of people are still locked in their shame and their fear and their guilt. So I really want to speak out. As you said, I'm passionate just to end the silence for other people so that they can find their voice and speak out. And I really learned that sharing my story is not for me anymore. It's what it can do for other people. It was someone else being brave and courageous that helped me find my voice. And I think that courage is contagious. So I really want to just help people find their voice, speak their truth, and be the them that they are meant to be, before the trauma.
So somebody yesterday, when we shared this event, had actually, I'm sure you saw, commented under and said they had seen your TED Talk, and that is what brought them to speak. So I was inferring that they meant their own experience with sexual violence. I'm not certain. They didn't quite specify that, but that seeing you step into that space of discussing it openly and working through that shame. Let them see that that's a road, that's a path that is possible. Because I can imagine that for the longest time, the idea of sharing that piece of you didn't feel possible. Like, is that a fair assumption?
Absolutely. If you went back in time and told my younger self one day you'd be standing on a stage with 2,000 people sharing a story, I don't think she would have believed it somehow. I still can't quite believe I did that. But yeah, it was actually the scariest moment in my life, but the most liberating, because it was like, well, here I am, and I don't really care now. Who knows? Because I know now, it took me a long, long time to realize the shame was never mine. The shame always belonged to these two men that decided to rape me. The shame, I held on to it inappropriately for years. It always, always belongs to the perpetrators, never the victims. But it's such a intimate crime, and we're not supported by society. There's so many victim blaming messages and rape culture that that silence us even more. And in the UK, the court system is rubbish. It needs so many changes. The chances of any case making it to court are slim, and then ending in a prosecution is even slimmer. So it's understandable why men don't ever report it or speak up about it, because we're not supported to do that.
Yeah, I can imagine the process is very disempowering when, imagining that you take a step towards reporting, and then, so the parallels I'm making in my life are not through the lens of sexual violence, but through the lens of having worked a lot with clients with disabilities and my own kids with disabilities, and trying to, fight against some problems in the system. And there's times where it just feels like, what am I wasting my time for? Because it doesn't seem to change. And so I can see how that then just further silences your voice, right? When you're trying to be heard. So I just want to real quickly say hi to Danielle. So Danielle's here watching. And again, if anyone else watching, just to say a quick hello and let us know where you're watching from. And if you're not comfortable sharing, that you're here, that's okay too. If you're here to gather some information, and that's completely okay also. And I'm suspecting people can reach out to you individually if
absolutely. Find me on LinkedIn or my Facebook page. Sure.
Okay. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you was, how much of that not speaking up and holding that shame yourself is because it makes other people feel uncomfortable? Because when you were sharing your story there, so I've heard your story before, I've done a podcast episode with you, like this isn't new to me, and I can still feel it in my body when you shared it to me, right? The I don't even know what that emotion is, the horror of what that must be like. So how much is that dynamic that other people are uncomfortable with it, and that feeds into people not wanting to talk? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, in the very beginning, when I wanted to go for help, part of me, and now I see it was my shame speaking to me, was so concerned for the other person. But I see now it was also judgment as well as shame. I thought they couldn't hear what I had to say. It was too much for them. I'd have to look after them, make sure they were okay. Or the other, they would be overwhelmed. It would be, they would be disgusted by what they heard, and they would look at me differently. They wouldn't want to know me. But my concern was always it was going to upset the other person if I told them. So that was another reason just to keep it in. But yeah, keeping it in, without a doubt, held me back. It was like, it put me in, I always kind of refer to like the deep freeze, there's a part of me that was just shut down because I numbed out and avoided life for years, really, because it was too painful to step into those dark chapters. But eventually that's what I had to do. I had to step into these dark spaces.
So I attended an amazing conference through Anima Leadership last week on deepening democracy. And at one point we went into groups to talk about, our experiences of inequalities and racial inequalities. And the word numb came up quite a bit as people shared. And so it's interesting what you're saying there, right? That holding in of it, how it can contribute to that feeling of just emotional numbness. So can you tell me a bit about how that impacted your life then? Like, let's maybe start with that phase, right? The phase of holding it in and that experience of numbness and the impact that had.
Well, I would do anything really to avoid feeling, and numb is still a feeling, even though I didn't think it was a feeling, but numb is still a feeling. So I developed an eating disorder. I attempted suicide, and looking back now, I didn't really want to die. I just wanted all the darkness to stop. I used drugs, alcohol to really put it far, far from my head. I had fears, phobias, anxieties. I didn't trust the world. The world was suddenly this unsafe place. I didn't know who to trust. Couldn't trust men. Was worried about being out of control. Was paranoid about my safety. And it was only when I was doing training as a volunteer for rape crisis on the helplines that I realized in the training we were talking about disassociation, the side effects of PTSD, and I went, oh my gosh, that's me. I've had that, all of the things, apart from self-harming. I was terrified of knives, so luckily I could never self-harm. So that was really, I had like 9 out of 10 of the things they were talking about. And then I realized I had disassociated for years, because on that night I really left the scene of the crime. I left my body, because it was a near fatal attack. And it's taken me a long time to really land back in my body. I always felt that I wasn't quite there, that life was going by and I was a bit on automatic pilot. I wasn't really living life, if that makes sense. I wasn't very alive or spontaneous or filled with joy. I was just kind of, just going through the motions of living. And I see now that was really still the effects of the trauma. That was still me holding back for the fear of trusting life, I guess.
Right. So I want to pop over quick just to say hi to Bill, who's here watching from Toronto. So thanks for joining us. And if people have questions for Madeleine, go ahead and, throw those in the chat at any time. And I'll obviously share those with her. So we also have LinkedIn user. LinkedIn for some reason doesn't pick up some people's accounts. So somebody is saying hi to you. Sounds like it's somebody you know. So thanks for watching. So yeah, one thing that I guess I want to comment on from that is I think there can sometimes be a lot of judgment in society around, looking at people who have eating disorders or who are struggling with alcoholism or, other types of challenges that you've mentioned. And my clinical experience working with various clients with mental health challenges has really shown me that those are sort of symptoms, like all of these sort of behavioral things that we see that are so judged in society as being like almost an inherent quality of the person sometimes, right? Like you're not strong enough to stop drinking or to stop using, or, you need to make better decisions in your life around those things. It's an easy perspective to have, I think, when you've never been in those situations, right? Like I'm somebody who hasn't necessarily had any of those particular experiences. And so it can be easy for me to think it's just so easy to quit. But I think when we can see them as a sign of, oh, wow, that person is really struggling with something, right? I think it just opens up more doors to healing. Yeah. And I just wanted to touch on that because I think that shift in views in society could lead to a lot more.
Yeah, I think support. We really need to shift the conversation to why are you behaving like that, to what has happened to you.
Yes.
When I was writing my book, someone said to me I could apply for my hospital notes because after I attempted suicide when I was 13, I spent a few months in a children's psychiatric ward. So I did. I got my hospital notes, which it wasn't easy. It wasn't an easy read at all. But I wanted to see it. Did they have any idea what had happened to me? And they didn't. There was about 200 pages. And a good chunk was from when I had my tonsils out. Another good chunk was when I had a kidney infection. And about 70 pages were from a 3-month stay in a psychiatric ward. And they talked about my eating disorder. They talked about my depression. No idea that I had been through a trauma. They just put me down to this adolescent with anorexia, and that was it. Yeah. Really, isn't it screamingly obvious that, overnight, literally, I changed to this young girl who couldn't eat, couldn't speak, hated herself. But no, they just never, ever asked me the right questions. Never.
So that's a really good point that you're sharing. I think having a background in healthcare, I think on the one hand, I think my training was lacking to the extent to which, I needed to listen and be open-minded and ask questions. And of course, there's my own personality parts that feed into that. But I also think the system is set up in a way where, people are so specialized in one thing that anything that lands just a little bit outside of that. So I've shared before that, I was a speech therapist. And so if I had a client who was suicidal, that was not my mandate, right? But whose mandate is it to listen to somebody who's telling you that they're suicidal? And although I do appreciate the professional boundaries between myself when I was a speech therapist and a psychologist or a social worker, there's also just a piece of humanity where if I'm to reply, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Let's start working on whatever speech goal. Like, to me, I need to be at least able to link you to somebody who has the professional background. And I think there's not enough, it's really, our healthcare system really works in silos a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the same in the UK. Today I was interviewing two people at the same time, which is unusual for me for my own podcast. And the two women whose sons at 17 both experienced a serious illness. So one was diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer who survived, and the other one was diagnosed with a mental health issue who sadly took his own life. And now she knows, if there's some signs, it's okay to say, are you thinking of ending your life? Are you okay? How are you doing? Have you got the right support? Do you need someone to speak to? But we stumble, with those questions. And when I worked as a therapist, I'm a psychotherapist as well, I would always ask someone that I felt, there was some ideation around suicide. Have you made any plans to end your life? And I would open up that conversation, because it's hard for people. It's very awkward. They'd rather just not get involved. It feels too messy. And if you can't help someone, you make sure they have good support. You signpost them to someone that can help them. But I think it's interesting, actually, if they're having speech difficulties, it may be connected to an emotional issue as well. We block ourselves. I literally didn't talk for about 3 years. When you talk about speech issues, I just grunted and groaned, which could have been a normal teenager, but I just really, I hardly communicated. I shut down so.
Well, and my perspective was, so I'll move on in a second, but I called the suicide hotline because I didn't know what to do, and I wasn't necessarily getting the best advice through my professional links, but I didn't feel ethically. I could just be like, great, thanks, ciao. Felt like because I kept thinking, gosh, if this woman goes home and commits suicide, and I know that I could have, I can't necessarily save her, but if there's something I perhaps could have done to guide her to support,
absolutely did the right thing. Absolutely.
There's people out there who know more than me, and but I can see what you're saying, in looking at your healthcare file where you feel let down. And so how do you get from that space where, looking back at your healthcare history and at the lack of support that you sort of experienced as you're going through this as a teenager, right? Where you don't even have the skills necessarily to navigate that. How do you get to a point where you are now, where you start feeling that you have the courage to speak up? What's the process that got you there?
Tons of therapy, tons and tons of therapy, a lot of talking therapy, a lot of maybe what you would call alternative therapy, a lot of body work. Really, I just was determined to clean up this trauma. I didn't want it when I eventually saw how it was impacting my life, because you have to really wake up to what it's doing to you. And I saw it was holding me back. It was impacting my life. I very nearly didn't become a mum. It was affecting my kids, my husband, my friends. And I saw, how my fear controlled me, how my phobias controlled me. And I didn't want that. I was tired of always being scared. I was just scared of everything. And I decided to challenge those fears. So I didn't realize at the time, but I kind of put myself into exposure therapy by literally plonking myself into situations that I would have run from normally. So really scaring myself intentionally. And then I saw fear was my imagination. None of it was real. It was all based on what had already happened. The worst had already happened to me. And it was based on what could maybe happen. And I had already survived it. So, I really was okay. But it took a lot of determination, a lot of courage to really go back to therapy, because I knew when I went for the last time, I should say, it was for 3 years. My eldest daughter was 13. So it triggered tons of memories. And I was the worst client. I said, take these pictures away. I don't want to see them. I don't want to see them anymore. They can't be true. It's a load of rubbish. I don't know what's going on in my head. And I realized that he couldn't take these pictures away. It always comes back when we're ready to face it, whether we believe that or not. And I really didn't believe it. But something inside of me always drove me to go to those sessions. And I hated them. I've been sick. I cried. I shook. My whole body would shake. I couldn't keep my legs still. And I'd be, worried about my legs. I said, don't worry about your legs. Just let them vibrate. Let them shake it all out. It's just the trauma rising up, through the cells out your body. It's all good.
That's powerful.
Really being committed, even though I hated it, to the process. And it is a process. Anyone that's watching or listening, it's not a sprint. It is a marathon. We can't recover just like that. It takes a lot of lifting of the veils, and many, many veils that I wore, and the way I saw life through the veils from a trauma place. And eventually we can work through these multi-layered veils and get to the place where you can really be okay with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I just want to go to the comments here for a second. So I had suspected, Shira, that was you LinkedIn user, but I just wasn't sure. And so she's saying, I think there's a lot of ignorance still in the healthcare system with addiction of doctors that meet trauma diagnosis by sexual survivor. And I agree. Like, I think there's a lot of education to be done about trauma in general, in healthcare and education in the world. And I do think it'll bring a different lens. The more I learn about trauma myself, the more I can see things through a more compassionate lens, I think, even.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I ended up in this place of forgiveness, and I called myself this accidental forgiver, but it really came from a place of compassion when I could really start to, somehow I felt compassion in my heart towards these two young men, what they had done to me. And that's when everything changed, because I really understood that none of us are born evil. I really don't believe that. We all come in this blank sheet, this, beautiful little baby that's, how can a baby be evil? But we get corrupted and conditioned by whatever we go through, whatever we witness, whatever we see, and that alters our mindset. It alters our behaviors. And I wondered really about these two young men, what they had been through or seen or even heard, so that they thought that was really okay to treat me like that. And I realized as well, when they're dehumanizing me, they're just dehumanizing themselves. When they were humiliating me, they're humiliating themselves. Because now, it took me a long, long time, I realized I'm not what they did to me. That true essence of all of us that we're born with, they could never, ever touch that. And, and that is really what the job, I think, of working the layers is, to get back to that, the real you, the real essence of you. And when you do that, it's brilliant. It's a lot more freer, and a lot more joy can come in, because that trauma, it just occupies so much space inside. It took over all of my being. So when you can work it, kind of set the button on the defrost and melt it away, it allows more of you to turn up, and more of you from before the trauma, and then even more of you that you didn't know was available to you. So it's
you can feel it talking to you, right? Like you can just feel that you're, I don't know, like at peace, happy, it's just, you can sense, right, that despite everything that you've experienced,
I'm also a bit stubborn.
It is possible.
Maybe it was my stubborn streak that helped me. And today is actually Holocaust Memorial Day. My dad was a survivor, and he really, watching him get through massive trauma. All of his family were murdered in Auschwitz. His youngest brother, Mordechai, was just 6. Sister survived, but had severe mental health issues. But my dad, he mucked about, he loved life, he laughed, and his laughter really was his strength, his ability to still see good in the world despite what happened to him. He came to the UK an orphan, built up an empire, was really successful businessman. And I saw, not really by what he said to us, we didn't discuss resilience or strength or overcoming adversity. Someone asked me that the other day, but I just saw how he lived his life, that you can not take life too seriously. You can move on from major, major trauma. And that, I just thought, if he can do it, I can do it. That gave me hope, always gave me hope. And he used to say to me, he could go days and days without food. He has an amazing story as well. He went on the run. He escaped from a labor camp, which is a whole other interview. But he said he would go days and days without food, but he could never go a moment without hope. So we always had hope. And I always have hope.
The resilience, eh?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
and I'm not superhuman. I don't have superpowers. If I have that resilience inside of me, my dad does. We all have that resilience.
I think there's a lot of people walking around with these stories being very resilient. We just don't know it, right? Because it's not yet, there's still a lot of stigma around it. But I do suspect that there's just a lot a lot of these stories.
Yeah, and that's why I love stories. That's why I love the power that comes from storytelling. It's so important to have stories told, because it just, it can totally transform someone's life if they hear it at the right time for them, and it can light up their map for their journey and their healing. It really can.
Yeah. So I do want to share on that note. So I did an interview recently with Madeleine on my podcast. So it's on the power of forgiveness. And it's really powerful, because to see your true, genuine forgiveness of the men who did this to you is very powerful. And so I'd invite anybody interested in taking a listen to that. You can go to lindsaylapaquette.com/podcast. It's the top episode there for the moment. And you can just take a peek at that there if you're interested in learning more. It's not the exact same conversation we're having here, so there'll be some additional nuggets there. And there's just a spot up top if you want to subscribe for notifications of further episodes and weekly videos. You can subscribe there. So one thing I want to go back to that you talked about a bit was you talked about fear. And this is one of the questions I wanted to ask around. So when we're talking about, bringing your whole self to work or to life in general, right? So not hiding away these parts of ourselves that feel shameful. And I think we all have these, whether we've had some really significant life experience like you have or not. I think there are still, pieces of ourselves that we often look at as being, the not good things that we don't want people to see. And the line between what is real, true, justified fear, right? Like that situation where it's truly not safe to speak up. So for instance, someone recently was mentioning how, as a person of color, going across the border and speaking up as you're being inspected is not necessarily a safe situation in which to speak up, right? Or I'm reading the book My Grandmother's Hands right now, which is a phenomenal read about trauma and intergenerational trauma for anyone interested. And it was, highlighting multiple stories of Black individuals being shot for, as we all know, no reason, that happens repetitively. So it's not safe. It's truly not safe in some of those scenarios to speak up. But also, I think our bodies then encode that feeling of not feeling safe that we bring into situations that maybe might be safe. So how do people navigate that, right? Like, what is real fear or justified fear, I guess, versus a perceived fear of speaking up?
Good question. I don't know if I have the answer.
It's a bit complex.
Yeah, it is. I just really saw my fear was lying. For me personally, I can't really speak for other people. We have to really, I think, become really good detectives in our life. Become a really good witness, grow your awareness, and ask yourself when you're in a moment and your heart is pounding, and you need to swallow, you feel dizzy and you feel really scared, you can't move, can't speak. Ask yourself, what's happening right now? Is this actual fear? Is there a bear running after me? Is my life at risk? Because there is sometimes there is appropriate fear, but I had so many examples shown to me that was inappropriate fear, and I just thought, I'm wasting all my energy. All my energy is going into this fear, and there's no reason to be feared, because the fear was my mind, And then I saw, what is my mind? I can't cut my mind open. I can't, it doesn't bleed. But my mind at the time, it's a very strange subject, because at the time I needed my mind to shut down, because otherwise I wouldn't have survived. I think I would have died. If I hadn't left my body, I don't think I would be here. So my mind was brilliant at the time, but it's like we are a piece of software and we need updated, and we all have our own unique, software that needs updated to the modern systems that we need. And my systems were just running on those 13, 15, 20-year-old systems. I'm 55 now. I really needed to update the system to really stay in the here and now is really what helped me. If I really stayed as steady and as grounded and as present as I possibly could, all there ever is this moment. I can't worry about the past. It's done. I can't worry about the future. It's not happened. Right. If I stayed right here, right now, which is what I try to do, it's not an easy job, but right here, right now, I know I'm okay. Nothing's happening to me right here, right now. Stay in that present moment as much as you can. And I think that really helped me. If you do feel fear come up, try to regulate your breath. So that will also calm you, but it will connect you into your body. Because for me, when I panicked, I was back out again, and I literally could feel myself leaving my body because I became quite expert at doing that. I had operations years later, and I've been on top of the operating theatre ceiling, and I could tell the surgeon afterwards, what was said about when they were working on my body, and I asked her afterwards and confirmed it. So I had this ability still to leave, which is amazing, but it's also a bit odd, really, isn't it? But it's a massive safety technique, that I learned, but I don't need to do that anymore. So my journey was always, because I never felt back in, I never felt home. It was always about getting back into my body. So I know when I'm fearful, I leave. And when I leave, I can't make rational decisions. That's when frustration, anger, short-temperedness, silence, all the physical symptoms come in. So I have to find a way to get back into my body, stamp my feet, clap my hands, breathe, connect, find my voice, whatever you need to do, run, walk, silence, whatever. Find a way to connect, look at the facts. Are you actually safe or are you not? Because you're right, there are some situations that aren't safe. And I think it's hard for women because, like you said, when I speak, it makes you feel uncomfortable. But I think that we pick up all the trauma that happens to our sisters, our mothers, our aunts.
It's that like empathy
daughters. Yeah, as women, we're empaths. We feel that. We can't deny that we are feeling. You have an open heart, which is beautiful, but then you feel as well. So that is the price that we pay when we feel. But you'd rather have an open heart than a shut one.
And I think that's part of the work too. Like for me, so as a huge empath, I think I spent much of my life taking on other people's pain. And I worked with clients who had really difficult life experiences. And I mean, I've had some of my own also, but then I also took on a lot that wasn't mine. And I had to learn, so not having a full distance from it, because I don't want to get to a space where I can't feel empathy for what you've experienced. But I also had to get to a space where I could experience it without it overwhelming my own system, right? And learning, like you're saying, to calm my own system, to settle my own system.
Self-care, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And now, like in that journey, and I think it's my own trauma that led me to be more aware of the need to do that. But in that journey, it's led me to a space where I can stay much more present with people who are telling me things that are hard to listen to sometimes, very hard, and I think that's part of that, even if somebody hasn't experienced a ton of this, of like the same experience, just being able to hold that space for people, I think is really powerful.
And you can stay steady because you've done the journey. And if you've done the journey, you can stay steady, then you can hold that space for someone else. If you're still traumatized, you can't hear someone else's trauma. It's too much.
Right.
These two women that I was speaking about earlier that I interviewed today for my show, they said that some people just couldn't come near them. They couldn't say anything to them. They didn't text them. They didn't bring food. They just didn't know what to say. And one of them was not so forgiving. One of them was more forgiving. And she said she realizes now there's a place in her life. She'd lost both her parents. She'd lost a father-in-law. Then her son had mental health issues. She wasn't in a good space to offer help to anyone else either. So you have to really practice self-care first, because if you're no good to yourself, you're no good to anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I do have another question for you, but I want to go into the comments here. So Shira is saying she wants to tell Madeleine, share her story. So she'd like, I think, to share her story with you privately, to use words to a woman that was a stranger at first. And the first thing she told her was, "It's not your fault." Really helped her. Yeah, every woman.
English is not Shira's first language. So she did. We met on LinkedIn, and she shared her own personal story with me. And I would always tell everyone, it's never your fault. We're always made to feel it's our fault. And then we do that to ourselves anyway. And then society does it to us. And, it just grows and grows. Blaming game. We need to stop it. And we need to start shaming shame, I think. So, bring shame. And that's the only way really that I was okay to stand in my shame. I had to face the shame, if that makes sense. Running from shame keeps it there. Avoiding it, distracting, not being in the shame, it just grows it. And shame loves secrets. It loves, darkness. But if we shine some light on it, if we stand into it, it's kind of counterintuitive. I can never say that word, to shame. So, bring the light to it, face it head on. and it will dissolve. It has to dissolve, because you're going to win. It can't exist when you bring light to it.
Right. And I think also the more that you realize that it's not yours to own, the more you can sort of stay solid in that place of when it's, so I don't know how to verbalize this, but what I'm thinking about is my post this morning about how our son was refused his service dog yet again in a medical environment.
Yes, I saw that. And there was nobody even in the waiting room.
There was nobody in the, I mean, it was clearly biased. Like, it was just so obvious, and she wasn't listening and whatever. I mean, we've had this happen before. It's not a major incident, but what stood out to me was how much shame was trying to be used to get us to concede. And years ago, it would have silenced me, because I would have felt, embarrassed and ashamed. But the more solid I have gotten in that, the more I can stand there and not let that consume me, and allow me to stay present in, like, again, when you get back to speaking about courage, it makes me feel more solid in my beliefs, knowing that just because someone else perceives me as a certain way, that's sort of a tool being used almost to silence my voice, because it works so effectively. And again, the conference I just went to through Animal Leadership talked about how, when you're trying to affect societal change, the first work we need to do is within ourselves. Yes. And I think that is very, very true.
But that sounds like you've got a better sense of self. So maybe a few years ago, you wouldn't have been able to stand up to this person. But now you're like, hang on a minute, this doesn't feel right in here. I'm not going to allow somebody to speak to me in that way. So yeah, good for you. Because you're right. The more you can stay steady, or solid, as you call it, balanced, grounded, connected in, you will be able to speak your truth, because you go, oh, actually, that feels really bad. I wish I had said that. How many times have we walked away from a situation? I really wish I could tell them how I really feel. You can. If you do it with a compassionate heart, if you do it, from a good intention place, without any bitterness, you say, actually, no, I'm sorry, this is my son's service dog and he needs to be with them. There's ways of saying things, we can hear the person's energy and how we explain things. It's much better for you.
Yeah.
It might not.
So you're reminding me of the other question that I had for you. And let me just double check if there's any comments here on, I think the Facebook comments come through, but yeah, they're coming through. Okay. So the other thing I'd wanted to ask you was, can you talk to me a bit about your experience then, going from recognizing that it was, yes, it was fear, but there wasn't a danger in that actual situation. So I'm thinking of, somebody who's at work who, feels that they have to hide their sexual identity, their gender identity, or is dealing with racism, or is dealing with even just unethical behaviors or mistreatment in the workplace. What was your experience as you started to share your truth? Like, can you talk to me a bit about how, in terms of like interactions with others, and how that evolved to make you realize more and more that speaking your truth was the path you wanted to go? And let me just say quick before you answer, if others do have questions, we'll be on here for another like 5-10 minutes. If others do have questions, you can throw them in the chat while Madeleine's answering.
I have to say, in the 6 years, I've been incredibly lucky. I've never really been trolled. I've never had anyone really send me any negative messages. The odd one or two, but I'm very lucky. A lot of my activism really started over on Twitter with the hashtag #MeToo, which just came out a few months after my book was published. So it was perfect timing for me. But it meant I could connect with all these amazing women, Rose McGowan, Rosanna Arquette, Mira Savannah, all these great big leaders in the silence breaking world. And if I ever had any negativity, I would just, tag a few people, and I had this army that would just come to my defense. And there is safety. Yeah, it was good. There is safety in numbers. I think if you are in a situation at work, speak to someone that you can trust. And if we really tune in and we listen to our gut, our intuition, we know who we can trust. Get somebody on your side. We need to support ourselves, but get a good team around you. And yeah, it's a difficult situation to be in, but I have to say I've always been so well supported. But I do believe I don't put out negativity. I'm not a man hater. My messages are always one of hope, of always belief, of always courage and heart. And I think what you put out is what you get back as well.
That's powerful. Yeah. I think too that the more, like when you said power in numbers, right? The more you share who you really are, the more you find people who accept that. And
Yeah,
there's a lot of power in that.
yeah, you attract your tribe, I suppose, really, don't you?
Mm, yeah.
Or
Yeah.
people see something in you that, I mean, I've done it with other people. They see something in you that appeals to them, and they want to get to that place, and they kind of, just stay intrigued and interested. And I'm the same with other people. There's something in there that I really like. What is that quality, and how can I get to that place? I'm motivated by others. I will motivate others. They will then go on to motivate others. It's a massive ripple effect. It really is.
Yeah. And I think that, to me, that's really the take home message, I think, of your story is, well, there's a few, I think, one being the great capacity of resilience and healing, right, of a human being when, you're able to access the support that you need and stay on that journey. I think your story is quite an inspiration to, those who are still in that space that you were in years ago of feeling sort of stuck and almost controlled by the like, in a sense of lack of agency, I guess, around it, to realize that there is hope for healing and for better. That's a huge takeaway to me. And I've now forgotten the other one that I was thinking of. So,
Okay.
but it was good.
Brilliant. And we'll never know.
That's so the way my brain works. Whatever the thing you said right before, that was the other takeaway. Yeah, it's gone. Yeah. Anyhow, well, isn't that a great way to wrap up?
Can't remember what I was saying. Goodbye.
So I guess on that note, I hope that everyone listening has found a bit of inspiration in terms of feeling that they can share their voice just a little bit more. I do think that it's sometimes, like you said, it's not I can't remember your words, but it's not just an overnight process, right? I think it's
not a sprint, it's a marathon,
That's a good way to put it.
I didn't get to this place just like that. It is, is in a ton of work, and it's determination, it's setting my intention, it's refusing to be identified by what had happened to me. It's many, many things. It is a bit of stubbornness as well. Not letting them win. I didn't want them to have total control over my life, which is a bit daft really, because they never controlled my life. That was all my thoughts. I was in control of what was going on, and I didn't see that I had locked myself into a prison. I was my jailer and my keeper, and I realized I have the key as well. I can let myself out of that jail. So I did.
Yeah, it takes a lot of commitment and a lot of work. And kudos to you for leading the way. So, I remember the second takeaway, and then I'll just go to the comments. The second takeaway, wait, it's like slipping out of my mind again, was about the trickle down effect, right? Of how I think that is really important too, right? I mean, it's kind of, again, just to get back to the service dog issue, like it's why I want to speak up about it and pursue it, is because it's more of the trickle down effect on society than that particular situation. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to stand up for, all social issues. But I do think that when we speak our truth, that it shows others, it gives others a hope or a light that, maybe I can do that.
It's contagious. I got my courage from somebody else, and I will help people find theirs, and it's absolutely the trickle, the ripple effect. It is amazing how it works. And there is, we kind of mirror what we see in other people as well. I do it, other people do it with me. It is absolutely an amazing ripple effect. And the more and more of us that speak out, what a brilliant world it's going to be if we can rid all the stigma and the shame and the silence, not just around sexual violence, but anything.
Yeah.
We need to be able to speak about the difficult things as well as the good things, especially now. We know mental health is so tough for people right now. In the UK, we're back in another lockdown. We've just passed 100,000 deaths, the first country in Europe to reach that number. It's horrific. But the vaccines come. This is not going to last forever. Things will get better one day. We have to hold on to that. There's always, always hope. So, it's where we put our attention. It's always about where we put our attention. What do you focus on? You focus on all the millions and millions of people that have recovered, or the people that have died. And we have to hold both, really. It's that paradox, but life is for living, really, and it is tough at the moment, but I still try not to take it too seriously.
Like you said, being in the moment, right? I think that's that's always key to getting back to feeling a little more grounded, is not, be aware of what's going on in society, but also to bring it back to the present moment. I think there's a lot of power in that. So I think you gave some great tips around that. So I just want to just share a few comments as we head off. And I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. I know this isn't an easy topic, but I think it's one that, excuse me, I think it's one that we need to be talking about more, and we need to be more open about. And so Bill here is saying, Madeleine, thank you for sharing your experience and helping so many find their voice. You're a beacon shining a light on the darkness of discomfort that prevents so many from addressing the endemic stigma. And thank you. That's such a beautiful way, I think, to sum up the work that you're doing. Yeah, thank you. And then thanks for hosting this highly important topic, breaking down barriers. Well, thank you. That's very meaningful to me, because I think that's part of what I'm trying to do in the world, is breaking down these barriers that are keeping us all seen as others.
We're all chipping away. Yeah, if we all chip away, we're going to break down those barriers. Absolutely.
Yeah. So thanks. And just a quick note again, one last time for anyone listening, you can catch Madeleine's podcast episode on the power of forgiveness at lindsaylapaquette.com/podcast. You can subscribe also there to my weekly newsletter. There's a video in every one on leadership communication skills, a podcast episode, and we've just started promoting our lives in there. I don't know why I wasn't doing that before, but we just had the idea to do so. And Madeleine, where would you like people to connect with you if they're interested in learning more about your work?
All over the place. I have a website, madelineblack.co.uk, over here on LinkedIn, Facebook, all the social media platforms. And you can also tune into my new podcast show, which is Unbroken, the podcast with Madeleine Black.
Yes, and that it's a phenomenal podcast. I really highly recommend you checking that out. It's lots of fascinating, hard stories, but good life lessons, I think, behind them. So, and on that, I will wish you. So Madeleine's doing her second TED Talk coming up, so I'll wish you all the best with that, and people can keep their ears and eyes peeled for that as it comes out. So thanks so much again.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll see you back next week. So next week I will be speaking with Adrienne Stark, and we're still settling on the topic. It's going to be around something around dealing with change. So I will have that up and promoted within the next week, and it will be Wednesday, 6 p.m. So hope to see you then. Thanks everyone. Bye for now.